All right, let's dive into one of history's greatest cold cases. We're talking about the mysterious fall of a truly brilliant ancient civilization and its connection to one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions the world has ever seen. So, here's the big question, the one that's at the heart of this whole thing. Could one single volcano actually wipe an entire civilization right off the map? I mean, it's a super dramatic idea, right? It's captivated historians for decades. But is it actually true? Let's find out.
Okay, so to really get to the bottom of this mystery, first we've got to meet our two main players. Think of it like a historical crime scene. You have a sophisticated Bronze Age society, and then you have this incredible force of nature with just unimaginable power.
So on one side, you've got the Minoans. They're this vibrant, thriving trading power based on the island of Crete. And then just 70 miles north of them, you've got this volcano on the island we now call Santorini. Back then it was known as Thera. It was, for all intents and purposes, a geological time bomb just waiting to go off. And what's really interesting is they never called themselves Minoans. That's a name we came up with much later. Historians gave it to them, inspired by the legendary King Minos from Greek mythology. But make no mistake, these people were remarkable. We're talking grand palaces, absolutely stunning art, and a trading fleet so powerful it basically dominated the entire Aegean Sea.
Okay, so let's pop open the evidence locker. Before we get into all the different theories and debates, what are the cold, hard facts? What do we know for sure?
Well, we know for an absolute fact that Santorini erupted with just colossal force. The geological data is crystal clear. No debate there. We've even found the buried town of Akrotiri right there on the island, perfectly preserved under layers and layers of ash, kind of like a Bronze Age Pompeii. And we know this thing was powerful enough to trigger massive earthquakes and unleash devastating tsunamis all across the Aegean. These are the solid, undisputed facts our whole investigation is built on. But this is where the case starts to get really complicated. So if you're sitting there thinking, easy, open and shut case, the volcano did it, well, the evidence tells a much trickier story. The single biggest problem, it's the timeline. Just look at these dates. We've got scientific evidence from things like tree rings that points to the eruption happening around 1628 BC, or, maybe a bit later in that century. But the main event, the big destruction of the Minoan palaces on Crete, the thing that really signals their downfall, that happens way later, around 1450 BC. We're talking a gap of over 150 years. A time lag is a massive problem for the theory that the volcano just delivered a single knockout punch.
And there's more. The archaeology shows us that the Minoan world didn't just vanish. It wasn't an overnight thing. Instead, it looks like they went through this long period of weakening and transformation. After 1450 BC, you start to see this new power from mainland Greece, the Mycenaeans, flexing their muscles and gaining more and more influence. It was a slow takeover, not a sudden apocalypse.
So, this all brings us to the central debate, right? Was the eruption a direct hit that just flattened the Minoans in one go? Or was it more like a slow-acting poison that just weakened them over a long time? Let's take a look at the evidence. Now, pretty much all historians agree that the immediate effects were probably severe. I mean, as this suggests, it's totally plausible, likely even, that massive earthquakes and huge tsunamis slammed right into Crete. That would have wrecked buildings, destroyed their ports, and just devastated their all-important fleet. Yeah, that part of the story makes total sense.
This chart here breaks it down really well. So, the damage from earthquakes and tsunamis, yeah, that's plausible. We can get behind that. The idea that maybe these quakes knocked over oil lamps and started huge fires that burned down the palaces? It's a possible hypothesis, but it's a lot harder to prove. But the theory of an instant collapse of their entire society, given that huge time gap we talked about, that's just really unlikely.
And this really gets to the key lesson here, doesn't it? You have to separate the solid evidence from the historical interpretation. The evidence tells us for sure that a massive eruption happened. That's a fact. But the interpretation? That's the debate over how much that eruption actually mattered to the fate of the Minoans. And that's where the real detective work comes in.
So, after weighing all the evidence, where do historians land today? What's the modern consensus? What's the solution to this whole mystery? All right. The verdict is in, and it's a lot more nuanced than you might think. The eruption was not the direct cause of the final collapse. The timeline just doesn't support that theory. Instead, most historians now see it as a powerful catalyst for a long-term decline.
Think of it as this immense shock to their entire system. It wrecked their economy, their ports, their trade, and all of that just left them incredibly fragile and vulnerable. This really breaks down the whole process perfectly. First, boom, the massive eruption happens, causing a huge economic shock. The Minoans, who are a sea power, get their ports and fleets hammered. This makes them weak, it makes them vulnerable. And who steps into that power vacuum? The rising Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. They see an opportunity, and they eventually take over. So you see, the eruption didn't push them off the cliff, but it sure did push them dangerously close to the edge.
So if we're going to stick with our cold case analogy, the Santorini eruption wasn't the lone killer, not at all. It was the key accomplice. It was the one who roughed up the victim, leaving them weakened and defenseless for someone else to come along and deliver the final blow.
And that leaves us with a really fascinating final question to think about, doesn't it? What's actually more powerful in the end? A sudden, explosive disaster, or the slow, inevitable tide of history? It's something to chew on.